Hello, my name's Chris. What's yours? Welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me as we wave goodbye to Jo Grant. I used to find this one a tricky one to evaluate, in all honesty, and I think that's probably because I largely agreed with the consensus, just in not as loud a voice. It's held aloft as one of the Pertwee high points, and I used to think that wasn't far off the mark. I'd always have put it in top 10 third Doctor stories, for instance, but it would have always been at number 10. So I would always champion its strengths for sure, but considering how loudly others did that, I'd always find myself like the one at the rally not really joining in as much. Yeah, I'd say weakly and then mutter to myself, it's not perfect. So, with this viewing, and perhaps because this is undoubtedly the most I have ever enjoyed the Pertwee era, I find myself now out of that not-so middle ground, and I don't find it difficult to articulate my thoughts and feelings about the Green Death anymore. I love it now. I mean, I hate it for taking Jo away from me, but I actually love it for how it takes Jo away from me. And I might have used to wince at what I consider to be an overuse of the CSO, and I used to keep quiet about that because it's a classic, but now I realise that it's a classic, so that use of CSO doesn't really matter so much. There is an element of this story which, if you'll forgive the terminology, I find really meaty. It doesn't get spoken as much about this story in favour of like Jo leaving or the giant maggots, something which even when talked about in Doctor Who gets shunted onto another story, but to be honest with you, the two Doctors can take a running jump because as far as I'm concerned, the Green Death is the vegetarian one. Now this facet of the story may not speak to a great many people, but as somebody who hasn't eaten meat in 17 years, I can't help but latch onto it. I'm delighted by how ordinarily it's handled. There's no preaching from either side, and both sides usually are incredibly preachy. The Brigadier declares he'd really like some beef at one point, but he confides that to the Doctor rather than getting all arsey with Professor Jones, and he's even surprised to find the veggie meal he's eating is veggie. Likewise, any preaching from Jones comes from a sustainability angle, and at no point does he, other than serving it at the Nut Hutch, laboriously extol the virtues of a vegetarian diet. The Doctor extols the virtues of protein for breakfast, with Jo balking at the idea of bacon and eggs, but as far as I remember, the word vegetarian isn't even uttered once in this story. And why this feels like such a big deal to me is that even today I still find the topics of vegetarianism and veganism quite tricky to negotiate because it can't help but put people's backs up. Very vocal factions, both vegans and meat eaters alike, have served to make this feel very much like an us and them debate for many of us. That's why we have to put up with jokes such as like, how do you know when someone's a vegan? They'll tell you. Now admittedly I have told you, but look, this channel's got over 100 videos by this point where I've barely mentioned it. If you think logically about it, I've brought it up because it's pertinent to what I'm talking about right now. And logistically, when it comes to certain things, we have to tell you because the assumption is that somebody isn't a vegan. This means that a stereotype is perpetuated based on a fallacy, so it's a minefield, and yet here, the Doctor and the Brigadier just tuck into a veggie meal without making a fuss. And it's because this story doesn't make a fuss about this that I find myself kind of like happily basking in a glimpse of utopia. Not that everyone's eating veggie, even though obviously that'd be something I prefer. I'm never going to tell people what they should eat. Just that no one's kicking up a stink about it. It seems daft, but that sort of thing really speaks to me. And in fact, it's one of the reasons why I love the Green Death as much as I do now. The characters and motivations at the Nut Hutch are very well sketched, and the Doctor being as impressed with Jones as he is after he's been sort of written off as a nutcase by everybody else means we then reconsider what we think of him after having met him. By association, we do the same with the Nut Hutch and its members. It's all done with a really lovely line.
Your paper on DNA synthesis was quite remarkable for your age.
A promising youngster, huh?
No, I mean for the age that you live in.
Succinct character building and flows beautifully, which brings me on to another reason why I think the Green Death works as well as it does. The script is incredibly well put together. Now, 6 episodes is usually almost always too long, but the better stories use their extended length more wisely than others, and that's true of the Green Death. Sometimes a story will use an extended episode length to throw in a plague, a chase, or a master, but the Green Death uses it to devote to its characters. Like, for example, the last time we saw the Brigadier, he was being the comic relief in The Three Doctors. I don't think he's quite the bumbling oaf that he's made out to be in that story, but I can't deny that his credibility does take a little bit of a hit, even though he does stop short of raising his fist to the sky and shouting, "Doctor!" Here, though, he is much better used. In fact, probably better than he has been for a really long time. It also takes its time over its villains as well. Both Boss and Stevens are great performances. It's tempting to compare Boss with Votan, but that would be unfair. Votan was meant to just be a computer. It was the monster. It relied on simply being a terrifyingly intelligent computer. Boss, on the other hand, is an actual performance, so therefore feels like a genuine character. The nuances imbued in Boss are so effective that as the story progresses, more and more interesting things can be done with it. When it starts humming Beethoven, it becomes playful. That's infinitely more terrifying in a sentient machine than simple intelligence. Intelligence means it could destroy you. Playfulness implies that it could feasibly enjoy doing it. When interrogated by Boss, the Doctor brings that righteous indignation to the fore and puts it to fantastic use.
Such as a little touch of brainwashing.
Freedom from fear, freedom from pain,
Freedom from freedom.
Another cracking line in a cracking script. The maggots might be one of this story's most identifying features, but for me, Boss is the villain, not the grubs, well realised though they are. I always watch it and think that even though Boss is head and circuits above Votan, this could still be quite an effective sequel to The War Machines. If Boss were Votan, but had learned from its previous defeat and is relying on organic matter this time, as well as increasing its own capacity for emotional intelligence, then it would work just as well. The thing is, to its credit, this era of Doctor Who was not in the habit of looking backwards, the anniversary celebration and the occasional Dalek story notwithstanding, and so it is more praiseworthy to have forged ahead with something new. I just can't stop myself from thinking like a fanboy at times though. Linked with Boss is of course Stevens, who is no less an impressive turn. He brings to mind Tobias Vaughan when he appears so focused and determined and therefore ruthless. The story doesn't shy away from grim, even though it somehow balances that with the Doctor in drag. And that grimness is evident in the employee terminating himself by throwing himself from a great height, and it's the villains that usually take responsibility for how bleak a story is. The bleakness of Tea Time Suicide therefore lies at the feet of Stevens and Boss. I can't help them but consider them to be fantastic villains. And then there's the surprise of the tear in Stevens' eye right at the end. It is electrifying, it's a jolt, a shiver down the spine, it's a fantastic performance from start to finish. I find it difficult to think of a duff performance really, beyond the usual suspect, Mike Yates. Apologies to Yates stans, and with the greatest of respect to Richard Franklin, I just can't get on with Mike Yates. He always feels like he's wandered in from another show and wants to play at Doctor Who. Can I join in your game? You know, that sort of thing. Yates being brainwashed to kill the Doctor could have worked in that I already think that Yates is a pillock. But somehow, not even that works for me. During his spectacular escape, Franklin unfortunately mugs and overacts to the point of embarrassment. The Wife in Space blog from back in the day described this better than I ever could. It looks as if Frank Spencer has been cast as James Bond. Luckily, elsewhere, the action isn't as shoddy. Pertwee, or rather his stuntman, gets one of his best fight scenes here, which ends with a really lovely doctory sign-off, which is something I didn't realise had been missing from previous scuffles.
Hope I haven't hurt you.
Sums up the Doctor's approach to these kind of things much better when he's walking away from a scrap. Most importantly though, the Doctor and Jo's relationship is given the utmost care. Setting up her departure in much the same way they did with Victoria makes for some very well acted scenes, particularly from Pertwee. The Doctor's repeated attempts to keep Jo's attentions and affections result in him, for once, being really rather vulnerable instead of the sure of himself force of nature he usually is. It's heartbreakingly lovable because it doesn't come with a single ounce of sexual jealousy. He just doesn't seem capable of understanding that she'd be interested in that kind of thing. Like, he can't get his head around it. And that gives him a sort of childlike quality that the first two Doctors definitely had, but which had kind of been missing a little bit from the third Doctor. So all of a sudden, with a distinct smack around the head, Pertwee reminds me once again that he is the same man. Then there's Katie Lovely Manning as Jo Lovely Grant. I think I've been more invested in Jo's journey than any other companions. Bewitched by Manning from the very beginning, I nevertheless didn't feel like Jo was showing what she was capable of for a while. But once she found her stride at the beginning of season 9, she's been utterly brilliant. That trajectory means I've taken to her quite a lot, and so her departure is hard-hitting, easily the most emotional one so far. This is because it's actually given weight. This has been the case, Liz accepted, since Victoria. That was treated seriously. Jamie and Zoe's felt so unfair that it packed something of a punch, even though it had come time for Jamie to move on. But Jo's is constructed so much more assuredly than any of those. Victoria had a bit of foreshadowing, which was welcome, but Jo's is woven so much more elegantly into this story. The genius of it is that it's actually a happy ending. She wants to go and travel the Amazon with Jones, and she gets her wish. It should be lovely. But, like the Doctor, we, mainly because we're probably watching it through the Doctor's eyes, feel like something has been wrenched from us. We want Jo to stay, so this is really sad, but look how happy she is. The Professor's proposal might be the most inept one ever televised, but while we've sympathised along with Jo's cute sad face, feared along with her adorable scared face, we now have the chance to rejoice in her beautiful happy face. But it's hard. It's hard because it feels like it's that old foe, rejection. You know, she'd rather stay with Professor Jones than with us. I'm happy for Jo, but my heart's broken. The Doctor's reaction is touching. In fact, Pertwee surpasses himself. Here we have the best example of how well the Green Death utilises its 6 episodes. For once, entirely appropriately, the show takes its sweet time as the moment is left to hang, and the Doctor leaves the party in what could quite possibly be the emotional high point of the show so far. It's a masterstroke, going from Jo kissing her husband-to-be to the Doctor alone driving along the sunset horizon. This is how to write and realise a companion departure. The level of maturity between this and previous companion departures is something else. In fact, I will quite happily subvert a stereotype and declare, no, there's nothing in my eye, I'm just crying. Goodbye Jo, a supremely tough act to follow. After 355 episodes, it's nice to be reminded just how Doctor Who can affect me. It isn't always thrilling at sci-fi escapades or delighting at the triumph of good over evil. Sometimes it's being emotionally challenged by what many people consider to be an inconsequential bit of fluff. That ending, almost the definition of bittersweet. It used to be too much CSO, but now these days, I'm ever so sorry, it's Mike Yates. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this veggie burger, then you know how YouTube works. Please do hit the like thumb and give it a big old share. I would be super grateful. And what do you think of The Green Death? Is it one of Pertwee's best, or is it ludicrously overrated? Does it do Jo's departure justice, or do you wish she'd have left through the back door like Liz? And how much will you miss her? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for a recap of Season 10. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll see you soon.